Ever heard of someone who is a botanist, industrialist, economist, medical pioneer, a media founder, agricultural reformer, translator, educator, astronomer, librarian, conservationist, women's rights advocate, public servant, moral reformer, a key figure in a cultural transformation?
Wow, that's quite a list.
Yeah, sounds unbelievable, right? Like one person could do all that.
Well, get ready to be amazed.
Today we're diving deep into the life and multifaceted impact of, well, one extraordinary individual.
Based on some truly fascinating material we've been going through.
William Carey.
William Carey, that's right.
We've got a stack of information here detailing just the sheer breadth of his contributions to India.
It's really quite impressive.
And our mission for this deep dive is to go beyond just, a simple, biographical sketch.
We really want to get under the skin of what drove this man.
Yeah, what were the core principles and motivations that allowed him to seemingly excel in so many different fields?
Fields that you wouldn't think one person could impact.
So many disparate fields.
And we really want to unpack how one person could have such a wide-ranging impact, and really what that reveals about the power of vision and belief.
Okay, so to kind of wrap our heads around this, I thought it would be fun to, imagine we're at the final round of some huge all-India universities competition.
I like it, a quiz.
Yeah, and the quizmaster poses the question, who was William Carey?
What happens?
Hands shoot up all over the room. Every student, knows the answer.
They all have an answer, but
Yeah.
probably a very different one.
Yeah, and to give everyone a chance, the quizmaster goes around the room, and the amazing variety of answers these bright students give will actually, form the structure of our deep dive today.
That's a great way to do it.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun way to see just how many areas Carey really, truly touched.
I think what's fascinating right from the start is exactly that variety of responses. It tells you right away that he wasn't some, one-dimensional figure.
Right.
His influence spread like ripples across so many different areas of life.
Absolutely. So first off, imagine a science student, confidently answering, William Carey was the botanist after whom Carya herbacea is named.
Oh, wow.
It's one of the 3 varieties of eucalyptus found only in India.
So we're starting with botany.
Yeah, and that's just, a tiny part of his botanical work.
Oh, absolutely. It goes so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
So beyond having a plant named in his honor, Carey was instrumental in introducing the English daisy to India.
Interesting.
Yeah, and perhaps more significantly for the development of science in India, he also introduced the Linnaean system of classification to Indian gardening.
Now, for those of us who maybe didn't study botany,
Yeah.
what is the Linnaean system?
So the Linnaean system, basically, it's a hierarchical way of organizing living things,
Okay.
putting them into different categories based on shared characteristics.
Okay.
It was a revolutionary way of, bringing order to the natural world.
At the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was also the kind of spearheaded the publication of the first books on science and natural history in India,
Yeah.
including the groundbreaking Flora Indica. Now, what's really interesting, I think, underlying all of this was Carey's profound belief, really stemming from his faith, that all thy works praise thee, O Lord. He saw the natural world as inherently good,
Okay.
created by a benevolent God,
Right.
which was quite different from the prevailing concept of Maya,
Maya.
or illusion,
Okay.
which suggests that the physical world was something to be shunned, not really paid attention to.
So for Carey, studying a flower wasn't just a scientific exercise.
It was a form of appreciating creation itself.
That's a really interesting connection between his faith and his scientific curiosity.
Yeah.
So nature wasn't just about cataloging species. It had a much deeper, almost spiritual dimension to it for him.
Precisely. And he frequently lectured, on scientific topics
Yeah.
with the aim of introducing this more fundamental scientific perspective to the Indian mindset. He even challenged, the prevailing idea that insects were just souls in a state of bondage,
Oh, wow.
arguing instead that they were these intricate creatures, worthy of study in their own right.
That's a huge shift in how you might view even the smallest parts of the natural world.
Absolutely.
Really interesting. Okay, next up in our imaginary quiz, a student of mechanical engineering chimes in.
Okay.
William Carey, they say, was the first Englishman to introduce the steam engine to India and the first to make indigenous paper for the publishing industry.
Wow. Okay, so now we're talking industrialist Carey.
Yeah, tell us more about this, like, practical side of him.
I think what's really cool here is it shows that he wasn't just someone who thought and wrote.
Right.
He was a man of action. He built things.
Hmm.
He brought this cutting-edge technology, the steam engine, to India,
Right.
recognizing its potential. But he was also committed to fostering local innovation. He really encouraged Indian blacksmiths to learn from and even try to replicate the engine using local materials and skills.
Oh.
And then his work in indigenous paper production, that was essential for his publishing.
Of course.
It meant he wasn't reliant on expensive imports, and we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
It's like he saw a need, whether it was for power or paper, and immediately set about finding a practical solution.
And often, like, empowering local communities in the process.
Exactly.
Really cool. Now, in economics, major steps forward.
Yeah.
And they say William Carey was a missionary who introduced the idea of savings banks to India
Interesting.
to fight the all-pervasive social evil of usury.
Oh, wow. That's a...
Yeah, they say Carey believed that God, being righteous, hated usury
Okay.
and thought that lending at the interest of 36 to 72%.
Those are some serious interest rates.
I know.
Wow.
Made investment, industry, commerce, and the economic development of India impossible.
So he was tackling a real economic problem head on.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, he saw this exploitative lending, often trapping people in cycles of debt,
Right.
as a major obstacle to any kind of advancement. So savings banks were a direct attempt to provide a more ethical alternative,
Okay.
something that was deeply rooted in his moral conviction.
Okay, so the economics student continues and makes a point that I think is really important even today.
Yeah.
They mention the sometimes questionable trustworthiness of financial institutions,
Yeah.
due to greed and corruption.
It's a timeless problem.
Right, and how bribery in Carey's time could even push interest rates up to, get this, 100%,
Oh.
making credit completely unavailable to honest, entrepreneurs and hindering any kind of fair economic growth.
So it sounds like this core issue he was trying to solve, making sure people can access fair and trustworthy financial services, is still a challenge for us today.
In many parts of the world, yeah, absolutely.
That's a great observation.
And the student also points out Carey's advocacy for European land ownership in India as a way to kind of attract capital and modernize the Indian economy.
So a bit of a controversial topic, perhaps?
Yeah, and initially, the British government, they were really hesitant about this.
Yeah, you can imagine.
They were recalling negative experiences with, land ownership issues in places like the U.S.
Makes sense.
But by the time of Carey's death, they'd largely come around to his way of thinking.
Huh.
And what's really remarkable, the student notes that the Indian government, after a period they call destructive xenophobia regarding foreign investment, has again, in more recent times, opened doors to Western capital and industry.
Oh, wow.
So suggesting that Carey's long-term economic vision, really did have an impact.
Even if it took some time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, moving on. A medical student jumps up and says, William Carey was the first man who led the campaign for humane treatment for leprosy patients.
Okay.
Until his time, they say, they were sometimes buried or even burned alive in India
Oh, my goodness.
because of the belief that a violent end purified the body, ensuring transmigration into a healthy new existence.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, natural death by disease, they say, on the other hand, was believed to result in 4 successive births and a 5th as a leper.
So you would keep being reborn with leprosy
Yeah.
if you died naturally from it.
And then they add, Carey passionately believed that Jesus' love extended to all, including leprosy patients, and therefore they deserved care and compassion.
That's a pretty horrifying practice he was fighting against.
Yeah.
So it sounds like his compassion for leprosy patients really came from his religious beliefs
Okay.
about the dignity and worth of every person,
Yeah.
regardless of their physical condition.
Yeah.
And that clashed with these prevailing cultural and religious beliefs
They did.
that led to such cruel treatment.
Yes.
So his advocacy for their care was truly groundbreaking.
Next, we have a student of printing technology who proudly declares, Dr. William Carey was the father of print technology in India. He brought to India the modern science of printing and publishing, and then actively taught and developed it.
Oh, well.
He built what was, at the time, the largest printing press in India. In fact, most other printers in the region had to buy their essential fonts from his mission press at Serampore.
So the man was a printing powerhouse.
It sounds like it, yeah.
He clearly recognized the power of the printed word,
Yeah.
both for spreading knowledge and, of course, for sharing his religious texts.
Right.
Building this sophisticated printing press, it was a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the machinery, but also things like casting the different fonts.
Well, the whole infrastructure.
Yeah, it was foundational for the entire printing industry in the region.
And a mass communications student adds to that. They say, William Carey was a Christian missionary who established the first newspaper ever printed in any Oriental language.
Really?
Yeah, because he firmly believed that above all forms of truth and faith, Christianity seeks free discussion. His influential English-language journal, Friend of India, served as a crucial force that gave birth to the social reform movement in India during the first half of the 19th century.
So he was not only a pioneer of the free press, but also a catalyst for social change.
Absolutely.
It's incredible how he used these different mediums to amplify his message.
Yeah, he understood the power of media
Absolutely.
to shape public opinion and drive those reform movements.
And founding a newspaper in a local language, that was revolutionary.
It was.
Really gave a voice to the people.
Yeah.
And his Friend of India became a platform for talking about critical social issues.
Okay, now the agriculture expert chimes in. William Carey was the founder of the Agri-Horticultural Society in the 1820s.
Okay.
A remarkable 30 years, they say, before the prestigious Royal Agricultural Society was even established in England.
Oh, wow.
Carey conducted systematic surveys of agricultural practices across India, regularly wrote advocating for agricultural reform in the esteemed journal Asiatic Researches, and even exposed the severe evils of the indigo cultivation system a full 2 generations before it finally collapsed.
Okay, so we're seeing some serious foresight here.
And really impactful work.
Absolutely. It shows his methodical approach to problem solving. He wasn't content to just observe.
Right.
He investigated, he documented, and then proposed solutions.
Yeah, it was very thorough.
And his early condemnation of that indigo system, that shows his commitment to social justice.
It does. And the agriculturist adds a really powerful insight into his motivation, noting that Carey did all this not because he was hired or commissioned to do it, but because he was profoundly horrified to witness that 3/5 of one of the finest and most fertile countries in the world, full of industrious inhabitants, had been inexplicably allowed to degenerate into an uncultivated jungle, abandoned entirely to wild beasts and dangerous serpents.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So he saw potential going to waste,
Yeah.
and it compelled him to act. Not out of obligation, but out of a personal conviction.
Okay. Moving into the world of language and education, a literature student shares. Carey was the first person to undertake the immense task of translating and publishing great Indian religious classics, such as the Ramayana, and significant philosophical treatises, like the Samkhya, into English.
Oh, wow.
In doing so, Carey fundamentally transformed Bengali, a language previously dismissed as fit only for demons and women, into the foremost and most respected literary language of India.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
He even wrote popular gospel ballads in Bengali, skillfully bringing the traditional Hindu love of musical recitations to the service of his faith.
That's fascinating.
And incredibly, he also compiled and published the very first comprehensive Sanskrit dictionary, specifically for scholars.
So he was making these important works accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah, both within India and in the West.
And his work with Bengali is particularly fascinating, elevating its status like that.
It's really incredible.
And that Sanskrit dictionary, that was essential for scholars.
Really important work. The education student then chimes in. They say, Carey, who started his working life as a British cobbler, incredibly became a respected professor of Bengali, Sanskrit, and Marathi at the prestigious Fort William College in Calcutta,
That's quite a journey.
where future civil servants of the East India Company were trained.
Oh, wow.
But his impact extended far beyond that. Carey personally established dozens of schools for Indian children from all castes.
So he was breaking down social barriers.
He was, through education.
Yeah, and he also launched the very first college in all of Asia at Serampore near Calcutta. His fundamental aim was to develop and liberate the Indian mind from what he saw as the restrictive darkness of superstition.
So he was a real believer in the power of education.
For nearly 3 millennia, India's complex religious culture had tragically denied the vast majority of its people free access to knowledge, and the various Hindu, Mughal, and even British rulers had, for their own reasons, largely gone along with this high caste strategy of keeping the masses in the bondage of ignorance. That's quite a statement.
Carey displayed extraordinary spiritual strengths in directly standing against the powerful priests and other vested interests who profited from depriving the masses of the freedom and power that knowledge inevitably brings.
So he was taking on some powerful forces.
He was.
And his own background, starting as a cobbler, makes his commitment to education even more remarkable.
It does.
I mean, to go from cobbling shoes to shaping the minds of future leaders, that's incredible.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit, let's turn our focus to the cosmos.
Okay.
A mathematics student steps up and says, William Carey was instrumental in introducing the systematic study of astronomy into the Indian subcontinent. He held deep concerns about what he saw as the destructive cultural ramifications of traditional astrology.
Interesting.
Yeah, specifically fatalism, pervasive superstitious fear, and a general inability to effectively organize and manage time based on rational observation.
So he saw astrology as a hindrance to progress.
He did.
Takes sense.
Yeah.
So he wanted to introduce a more scientific understanding of the heavens
We did.
to combat these negative cultural influences.
His goal in introducing the scientific understanding of astronomy, they say, was to emphasize that the heavenly bodies were created by God to assist humanity in governing the earth, providing a reliable framework for developing accurate calendars, understanding geography, and managing time effectively, rather than dictating their destinies through mystical influence.
So for him, astronomy was about empowerment through understanding.
It was.
And astrology was about subservience to these supposed cosmic forces.
Exactly. A really interesting contrast. Now, we have a library science student who pipes up and says, William Carey pioneered the radical idea of establishing lending libraries throughout the Indian subcontinent.
Lending libraries? That's a great idea.
It is.
Why was he so passionate about that?
Well, he fundamentally understood that widespread access to information and knowledge was absolutely crucial for progress.
Of course.
And while the East India Company was primarily focused on, military might and trade,
Right.
Carey recognized the transformative power of readily available knowledge.
He was ahead of his time in that sense.
He was. And he famously requested that shipments of educational books and agricultural seeds be sent to India alongside shipments of ammunition.
Wow, that's a striking image.
I know.
Books and seeds next to ammunition.
He firmly believed that these were the essential building blocks of a thriving society.
And what about indigenous literature? Did he have any thoughts on that?
He did. His initial goal was to provide broad access to global knowledge through these libraries until, a strong foundation of indigenous literature could be developed.
Makes sense. You need that foundation to build upon.
Yeah.
So he was thinking long term.
He was. Okay, our student from the Indian Forest Institute now takes the stage and says, William Carey was a dedicated evangelist who profoundly believed that if the gospel flourishes in India, the wilderness will, in every respect, become a fruitful field.
Interesting quote.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, they go on to explain. This belief extended beyond the spiritual realm.
Okay.
He became the very first person in India to write comprehensive essays specifically on the importance of forestry and conservation. Doing so almost 50 years before the government made its initial, rather hesitant attempt at forest conservation in the Malabar region.
So we're talking way ahead of his time.
Carey vigorously advocated for and actively practiced the careful cultivation of timber, offering practical and detailed advice on exactly how to plant and manage trees for a wide range of essential environmental, agricultural, and commercial purposes. His core motivation stemmed from his deep religious conviction that God had entrusted humankind with a fundamental responsibility to care for and steward the earth.
A true pioneer of environmentalism.
It sounds like it.
It's incredible how his faith informed his actions in so many areas.
It was directly in response to compelling articles published in Carey's influential journal, Friend of India, that the British government finally took concrete action, appointing Dr. Brandeis of Bonn to oversee the critical forests of Burma and arranging for the systematic supervision of the valuable forests of South India by Dr. Clegham.
So his writings had real-world impact.
They did.
It's inspiring to see how one person's voice can make such a difference.
Now, a female social science scholar steps up and really emphasizes Carey's work in another important area. She passionately argues, William Carey was unequivocally the first man to stand firmly against both the brutal murders and the widespread systemic oppression of women that was tragically almost synonymous with certain religious practices in 18th and 19th century India.
That's a powerful statement.
The patriarchal structures of the time subjected women to unimaginable suffering through practices like polygamy, the horrific crime of female infanticide, the widespread prevalence of child marriage, the agonizing practice of widow burning, sati, a form of cultural euthanasia, and the deliberate denial of basic female literacy, all often tragically sanctioned by prevailing religious interpretations.
That's a long and heartbreaking list of injustices.
It is.
It's hard to imagine the level of suffering that women endured during that time.
The British government, in its early years, timidly accepted these deeply harmful social evils as being an irreversible and intrinsic part of India's religious and cultural norms.
It's easy to see how they might have felt overwhelmed by the scale of the problem.
Carey, however, began to conduct rigorous sociological and scriptural research to understand the roots of these practices. He bravely published his often disturbing findings in order to raise public awareness and generate protest both within Bengal and back in England. He personally influenced an entire generation of future civil servants, his students at Fort William College, urging them to actively resist these deeply ingrained evils.
So he was using his influence to affect change.
Carey fearlessly opened schools specifically for girls, recognizing the power of education for female empowerment. When widows converted to Christianity seeking a different life, he personally arranged marriages for them rather than allowing them to be burned alive on their husbands' funeral pyres.
He was really putting himself on the line to protect these women.
He was incredibly brave.
It's inspiring to see someone stand up so forcefully for what's right, even when it's dangerous.
It was Carey's relentless and persistent 25-year battle against the barbaric practice of sati that finally led to Lord Bentinck's landmark edict in 1829, officially banning one of the most abominable of all religious practices in the world, the horrific burning of widows.
A truly remarkable achievement.
It is.
His tireless advocacy really did make a difference.
A public administration student then points out, William Carey, despite being a British missionary, was initially denied entry into British India because the powerful East India Company was strongly against any attempts to proselytize among the local Hindu population. As a result, Carey was forced to work in the small Danish territory of Serampore.
Oh, wow. So he faced opposition even from his own countrymen.
He did.
It's interesting how his missionary work actually led to his involvement in public service.
It is. However, ironically, because the company later found itself unable to find a suitably qualified professor of Bengali for its newly established Fort William College, Carey, with his unparalleled linguistic skills, was eventually invited to teach there.
So they needed him.
They did. During his long and influential professorship, lasting for an impressive 30 years, Carey played a pivotal role in fundamentally transforming the ethos of the British administration in India, shifting it away from a primary focus on indifferent imperial exploitation towards a new ideal of dedicated civil service.
So he helped shape the way the British governed India.
He did.
Wow, that's a significant contribution.
It really is. Next, we have a student of Indian philosophy who raises a fascinating point. William Carey, beyond his other achievements, was a profound preacher who effectively revived the ancient and originally foundational idea within Indian thought that ethics and morality are intrinsically inseparable from genuine religious belief and practice.
That's an interesting idea.
This had been a core assumption underlying the early Vedic religious traditions. However, subsequent Upanishadic teachers had, over time, increasingly separated ethics from the pursuit of ultimate spirituality.
Okay, so there was a shift in thinking over time.
There was. Their core belief centered on the idea that the individual human self, the Atman, was in essence identical to the universal divine self, Brahma. Therefore, according to this philosophy, our true spirit cannot actually sin. It only becomes deluded and mistakenly begins to perceive itself as separate and distinct from God.
So in this view, sin is essentially an illusion.
What is ultimately required is not deliverance from sin in a moral sense, but rather enlightenment, a direct mystical experience of our own inherent divinity. This philosophical denial of fundamental human sinfulness and the strong emphasis on achieving a purely mystical experience of our supposed divinity inadvertently made it possible for individuals in India to be intensely religious in their outward practices, yet simultaneously engage in what might be considered unabashedly immoral behavior without apparent contradiction.
So you could be devout but still act unethically.
According to this philosophy, yes,
It sounds like Carey was challenging a deeply ingrained worldview.
he was.
It's fascinating how he engaged with these complex philosophical ideas.
And the philosophy student goes on to say how Carey's powerful teachings and his unwavering commitment to ethical living profoundly influenced even prominent and influential Indian thinkers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy,
Oh, wow.
who himself began to critically question certain prevalent aspects of traditional Indian spirituality after encountering Carey and his fellow missionaries, ultimately finding the ethical framework presented by the teachings of Christ to be more consistent and conducive to sound moral principles.
So Carey's influence extended beyond his immediate circle.
It did.
It's amazing how his ideas resonated with such prominent figures.
Now, finally, a history student ties it all together, saying, Dr. William Carey, in his remarkably multifaceted impact, can rightfully be considered the father of the Indian Renaissance of the 19th and 20th centuries.
The Indian Renaissance, that's a bold claim.
It is, but they make a strong case. While Hindu India had reached its zenith in intellectual, artistic, architectural, and literary achievements by around the 11th century A.D., they explain, the subsequent rise and widespread influence of the absolute monism advocated by Adi Shankaracharya, beginning to sweep across the Indian subcontinent in the 12th century, arguably led to a gradual drying up of the creative springs of human endeavor and the beginning of India's long period of relative decline in these areas.
So they're suggesting that there was a kind of cultural stagnation.
Exactly. The material world, human rationality, and much of what enriches human culture came to be viewed with suspicion, as mere illusion, Maya. Asceticism, the deeply harmful practice of untouchability, mysticism, occult practices, pervasive superstition, widespread idolatry, beliefs in witchcraft, and a range of other oppressive beliefs and practices became increasingly defining hallmarks of Indian culture. The subsequent invasions, economic exploitation, and the resulting long period of political dominance by foreign rulers only served to exacerbate these existing problems and deepen this cultural stagnation. It was in this complex and often chaotic environment that William Carey arrived and initiated a powerful and far-reaching process of India's fundamental reform and revitalization.
It sounds like he arrived at a pivotal moment in India's history.
He did. Crucially, he viewed India not as a foreign land to be exploited for personal or national gain, but as his Heavenly Father's land, a place to be deeply loved and diligently served, a society where truth and reason, not ignorance and superstition, needed to prevail. Carey's transformative movement ultimately culminated in the birth of modern Indian nationalism and India's subsequent hard-won independence. Carey firmly believed that God's divine image was inherent in all of humanity, not merely confined to inanimate idols. Therefore, it was oppressed humanity itself that deserved to be served with compassion and justice.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
It is. He championed the importance of understanding and responsibly utilizing the natural world instead of simply fearing, appeasing, or worshiping it as divine. He stressed the critical importance of developing one's intellect and capacity for reason instead of suppressing it, as certain mystical traditions sometimes advocated. He emphasized the value of appreciating and engaging with literature and culture instead of shunning it as mere illusion. His deeply impactful this worldly spirituality, which placed an equally strong emphasis on the urgent need for justice and selfless love for one's fellow human beings as on the love for God, marked a crucial turning point in Indian culture, shifting it from a downward trajectory towards a path of renewed progress and positive development.
So he was advocating for a holistic approach to progress, one that encompassed both the spiritual and the material.
Exactly. And the student concludes, significantly, many of the early and influential leaders of the Hindu Renaissance, such as the renowned Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Keshub Chandra Sen, and numerous others, openly drew significant inspiration and intellectual sustenance directly from the groundbreaking work of William Carey and the network of dedicated missionaries associated with him.
So his impact extended far beyond his own lifetime.
It did.
His legacy lives on in the work of those he inspired.
So after hearing all of that, who was William Carey?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's clear he was all of those things and so much more.
A truly pivotal figure in India's modernization.
Yeah, a pioneer of the Protestant church in India.
And a gifted translator who brought the Bible to so many people.
And ultimately, Carey's extraordinary story isn't just a historical account.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder that one person's beliefs and actions can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
That can change the course of history.
It makes you wonder, what kind of deep dive are you going to take in your own life? What impact are you going to make on the world?
That's something for all of us to think about.
It is.